The 574th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Here we go. Page has it. Second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No, baby. Does it for the Tar Heels.
And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead.
Matthews off the mark, and this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services, here with you on a Friday night, roughly about 24 hours after Carolina made another addition to their roster via the transfer portal ahead of the upcoming basketball season. A move that I guess you could say we've been expecting for the last week and a half to 2 weeks was finally made official. We're here to talk about who that player is, what he'll bring to Carolina, and really what I think the message Hubert Davis is trying to send with the latest transfer portal addition to the roster for the upcoming season. We'll also go into another top 25 list, this one also being done by the good folks over at The Athletic. They rank the top 25 players of the last 25 years. Only one Tar Heel made the list, that being Tyler Hansbrough. And I've got a problem with his ranking, so we'll get to that a little bit later on in the show. We start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. We go to the late, great Kobe Bryant for that pod thought. That thought is, quote, leadership is lonely. If you're going to be a leader, you're not going to please everybody. You have to hold people accountable, even if you have that moment of being uncomfortable, end quote. I think that's going to be the biggest task that Hubert Davis and this coaching staff has ahead of them this summer going into when practice opens up in the fall, is creating leadership on a roster that now features 10 new players. And you got six transfers, an international pro, and 3 freshmen all joining this roster for the upcoming year, with really only Seth Trimble, the only known contributor back on the roster after last season. And we talked so much last year about there being a lack of vocal leadership on the court. A lot of criticism went to the way of R.J. Davis, who was more of a leader by example, but quite frankly, that wasn't good enough for last year's team. They needed someone to be more vocal. I think we're confident that Seth Trimble is ready to be that guy. I think Carolina is banking on him being that guy, but nonetheless, he'll be in a leadership role that he's never been in during his 4 years in Chapel Hill. And so hopefully with the practices over the summer, with some of the team bonding exercises they've done, they've been able to cultivate leadership in a way that they didn't have last year. And that was a big reason why that team did not live up to the preseason top 10 ranking.
Yeah, I mean, you got to look to some of the transfers that are coming in. You got to look to even a guy like Caleb Wilson as a true freshman to come in and be a leader out there on the court for Carolina. But ultimately, the guy that everybody's going to be looking towards is a guy in Seth Trimble who's been here for a while now, who really knows the trials and tribulations of going through a season at Carolina, going through a conference season as well. Some of the other guys, have been through conference seasons in other conferences. Or in the case of someone like Jaden Young, he's a guy that's been through this before in the ACC. So maybe that's another guy who could end up being a leader for Carolina. They just need guys that are a little more vocal on the court, because you go back to, the season 2 years ago when you had Harrison Ingram, when you had Cormac Ryan. Those were guys that, it made sense why Carolina was so successful, because they were so vocal out there. And it really was, the level of communication was as good as we've ever really seen it for Carolina. You're hoping something similar happens this year with this year's group. There's a lot of talent here. I don't think anybody is questioning that. It's just, will this group really be able to find that vocal leadership that steps up on the floor with so much turnover? I think that's going to be an incredibly important question that Carolina has to answer pretty early in the season.
All right, let's get to the first task at hand, and that's talking about the latest transfer that Carolina has added to the roster. Rumors about this move kind of circulated about 2 weeks ago, but for whatever reason, it took us 2 weeks for this news to be made official. Don't know why it was made official at 10:30 on a Thursday night, but that was when Ivan Matlakovich decided to make it known that he was transferring from High Point to Carolina, and he becomes the 10th Tar Heel to join the program ahead of the 2025-2026 season. You're talking about a guy that played in just 5 games at High Point a year ago for a program that did make the NCAA tournament, mind you, but just played in, as I mentioned, 5 games, and across his time averaged just 2.6 points and 1.8 rebounds for the Panthers. I guess the good news is, if you're looking at this, is there is 3 years of eligibility left for him, because he just played the 1 year so far. So, Carolina could have a guy that could be a depth piece in the front court for the next 3 years. You have to like that he has size. He stands at 6'11", so another guy that fits the bill of what Hubert Davis was looking for this offseason, which when you look at last year's roster on paper, you look at this upcoming year's roster on paper, it's very clear that this is a much bigger team than they were a season ago. And another theme of the offseason is Carolina adding international flavor. You have Henry Visar on the roster. He's from Estonia. You've had Luka Bogovac from overseas as well. Matt Lakovic comes from Croatia and has experience playing for the Croatian national team in the under-18 European Championships back in 2022. Just surface level stuff here. What do you make of Carolina adding a piece this late in the transfer portal, and it being another piece in this revamped front court for Hubert Davis and Carolina?
Well, it's nice that the rosters got expanded. I think that's really the reason why he's on this roster, is because you've got extra scholarships. If you didn't have the extra scholarships, then he wouldn't be here. That's the biggest reason that Carolina brings him in. It's just because he's got some size to him. I still think there are some questions in the front court, but I will tell you, I'd be shocked if this guy plays a lot this year. This was a guy that last year at High Point saw his most action against a school called Carolina, which I believe is Carolina College, and Pfeiffer University, which we are very familiar with here in the Charlotte area. It is a very small Division II school. If you're playing against those opponents and that's really it, I know he also saw action in the game against Gardner Webb when I was watching his very short highlight video that was put up earlier. Other than that, he didn't see the floor at all. So, I mean, look, maybe this is a guy that comes out and just shocks all of us and all of a sudden becomes this great player. But I think the reason that Carolina went out and got him is because he is a bigger player. He is a guy that, will provide some depth on the roster just in case there is some sort of injury. But the idea is that this is someone that maybe in the future grows into a part of what you do. Maybe. But ideally, I think this is a guy that's just there to take up a roster spot for now, to really just give you some extra depth there this season. And, you just kind of see where it goes from there. Very similar to what Carolina did when they took on Will Shaver out of the high school ranks back a few years ago, and what they did with James Okonkwo a couple of seasons ago, where they brought him in. It was kind of wait and see. And you look, James Okonkwo has gone on to Akron and had a pretty successful season this past year. So I think that's probably the strategy that Carolina's taking towards it. What's the harm in adding a guy like this? And you just kind of see where it goes.
Yeah, I think this is the benefit of your roster being increased to now you can have 15 scholarship players on it. And I guess this is the downside of you no longer having the JV program, because Carolina would still fill out its roster, but they would be with non-scholarship athletes. And look, Hubert Davis and Carolina worked very tirelessly and very endlessly to find a way to keep that program around. But once the House settlement became official, we always knew that was going to be the nail in the coffin for the JV program. Bare minimum, this is just a guy that they're adding to have an extra body in practice. That's pretty much what this is. I mean, I would like to sit here and try to sell you on there being a role, there being some sort of playing time for him this upcoming season. I don't mean to be harsh, but if I see him on the court in meaningful action, that means this season's gone terribly wrong. That's because someone either got hurt or some dudes just aren't good enough, and that's all Hubert Davis has to turn to. You might see him in some of the non-conference competition that Carolina plays, because you've got some games in November and December that should be over relatively early in the second half. I don't see this guy playing any games against the top 25 competition Carolina will play. I don't see this guy playing in any meaningful ACC game. And maybe he develops into something down the road. Kind of hard for me to envision that even happening as well. But I think this is, the reality of you having 3 scholarships that you could still fill. And I would imagine Carolina still had some money that they set aside for basketball, with revenue sharing being legal, that they just felt the need to go ahead and spend. Because there's really not any other reason to even explain, let alone justify, why they brought Ivan Matlakovich into the program ahead of the upcoming season. I do wonder if this is another example of Carolina, because we know the international thing, and we've talked about it all summer. This is not just this offseason. Carolina is going to recruit internationally, I think, every year moving forward. I don't know if they'll ever be like Illinois, who built their whole entire roster off international talent, and a roster that could compete for a Big Ten championship up there in Champaign. I don't think Carolina is ever going to be that much in love with their national recruiting. But to me, I just wonder, is this just another way of them planting their flag and expanding their presence overseas? Because now you've got 3 players from 3 different countries that I think they'd like to be able to really develop recruiting relationships in the years to come.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not going to be like what we see from a team like Illinois, as you said. I mean, they're a team that literally, if your last name doesn't end with the letter C, you're not playing for them. I think this is them basically making a statement that, look, this is a place that if you are an international prospect, you are open to come play here. This is not like in the past where we are basing most of our recruiting inside the United States. We need to expand our borders a little bit and look to some of these other guys in these other leagues that are very successful. You've seen it with Luka Bogovacs, who we're hoping is going to be, a part of this team. We still have to wait and see on that. And now you see it with this edition where Carolina is just saying, hey, we're going out there. We're looking for guys that have played, a little bit of international basketball. You mentioned that he was part of a U17 squad, I believe. And so, I mean, for him, I think, it's a little bit different than Bogovac. Bogovac is a guy that I think we're looking to come in here and actually make a pretty significant impact for Carolina. A guy like Dame Sarr at Duke, looking for him to come in, make a huge impact. This is not necessarily that, but I mean, look, Duke did a similar thing, picking up a guy out of Rice that I believe is from Africa. Very similar type of production, really didn't produce last year. I don't know if it's just these colleges here in the local area just trying to say, hey, look, we're open for business when it comes to negotiating with these foreign players overseas. But if it is, I mean, maybe it's a way that, Carolina can get in overseas and start to crack some of these talented players. Because, man, I mean, you look at some of the guys that are going into the NBA. I'm not saying you're going to land a guy like a Nikola Jokic, which, I mean, who knows? During this time, you might be able to, because Nikola was a guy who was a second-round pick in the NBA draft, not necessarily a guy that was highly touted. But you're not going to land a Victor Wembanyama. You're not going to land someone like that. But you can still land guys that are fairly impactful for your team. So I do think that Carolina's kind of doing their homework here and saying, hey, if this helps us out a little bit by adding a guy like this and maybe it extends that olive branch, then why not go ahead and do it?
I definitely understand wanting to have a presence in Europe and expanding your footprint. Europe is producing better basketball players than the United States is right now. This is something that you hear Gino Auriemma talk a lot about. The way that they get their players ready for, whether it's when they come over here to play college or get them ready for the NBA, is the way that it should be here, which is a lot more time practicing and not as much time playing. Like if you're a top flight prospect in high school, yeah, you're playing in an AAU tournament or a some sort of event every week, every weekend, and you're playing 3, 4, 5, 6 games in a 3-4 day span. But you're not working on your fundamentals because all you're worried about is get prepared to play the game and be able to put up numbers. Whereas over there, they drill the fundamentals into these into their head. That's what they focus on. They hone in on. And it's why when they come over here, it's not like it was in the 80s and the 90s where there was a big gap. They're just as tall. They're just as athletic. They're just as fast, or they're just as strong, but they're also better disciplined. They got better fundamentals, and they've got a better IQ than what what we've been told the majority of our lifetime. So I definitely understand why Carolina wants to have the international player on its roster. I think that that'll be something they target every year moving forward. Same thing with Duke. You've seen where like Illinois, that is their recruiting. Like, I mean, I'm not trying to blow it out of proportion, but I think they have 6 dudes from Europe on their roster for the upcoming season. So it's pretty much they're going to recruit Europe and then they'll go recruit the transfer portal. And if you're in the transfer portal and you're from Europe, then you're probably going to go play for Brad Underwood and the Fighting Illini. So I understand the vision. I think this is actually something that I'm not going to say I was critical of Roy Williams during his time, but maybe would have pushed for it as we saw, other programs start to recruit on an international level. Sean Miller at Arizona was one that was able to go overseas. You've seen Kansas be able to go overseas at different times as well. So I do think that this is one thing that you got to give Hubert Davis for doing and really experimenting with. Hopefully you're getting results from Luka Bogovac, Henry Visar, 2 guys that Carolina are counting on in a big way. I just can't say the same thing about Ivan Matlakovich, but who knows, with 3 years, anything is possible. And maybe, just maybe, there's a point in time where we're talking about him being a quality reserve man for Carolina basketball. I just don't see that happening this upcoming season. and we still got a few weeks until fall, the fall semester starts. I do believe this is the final edition for Carolina. If you're having to go to the depths of bringing in a guy from High Point that played in just 5 games, that would pretty much tell me the market is all but dried up. But with 2 scholarships available and maybe some money still left over, who knows? Maybe Hubert Davis, Jim Tanner, that front office and the coaching staff are still maybe looking to add a player or 2 before we get the season officially underway. And let's now turn our attention to the latest top 25 ranking that I want to go through. We did this a few editions of the podcast ago where we went through the Athletics article, the top 25 coaches of the last 25 years. They had our man Roy Williams, number 2. Speaking of Roy Williams, happy birthday to him. Hope he has had a great and fantastic day. Saw some cool posts from Carolina Basketball on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram shouting out his birthday. So we do want to, wish our favorite head coach of the Tar Heels a happy birthday. The latest list that I want to go through is the top 25 players of the last 25 years. And as I mentioned when I set the scene for today's episode, there was only one Tar Heel that made the list, which maybe or maybe not is surprising. We can maybe talk about that here in just a second. You're probably aware that guy would be Tyler Hansbrough. And I don't know where I thought he should have been. When I saw him come in number 8 on the list, I was pretty taken aback and really flabbergasted at that ranking. The players he was ranked behind, I'll read you the top 10. So number 1 is Carmelo Anthony, maybe the best one-and-done freshman of all time, leading Syracuse to the national title back in 2003. Number 2 is Jalen Brunson, of course, 2-time national champion at Villanova. Number 3 is Steph Curry. Of course, we all know what he did at Davidson in that 2008 NCAA tournament run. Number 4 is Anthony Davis, probably the second best one-and-done freshman, winning the national title for the Kentucky Wildcats in 2012. Number 5 was Kemba Walker, a national champion for UConn. And, of course, one of the greatest individual march maybe we've ever seen in the history of college basketball. Number 6 was Jameer Nelson, the top flight guard for St. Joe's in the early 2000s. Number 7, Shane Battier, the decorated Duke player that was a big part of some national championship teams there in Durham. Number 8 is our guy, Psycho T, Tyler Hansbrough.
All right, looks like Josh froze up there, unfortunately, on us. Let's see, hopefully, if we can get him back here at some point. Yeah, there he goes. He dropped off right there. Hopefully, those internet connection issues do get fixed. But Psycho T, as you heard right there, 8th on the list, definitely seems pretty egregious for sure. You look at some of the names that are on that list, and see, this is what's tough. The first 2 names on the list are 2 guys that I love, as a NBA fan. Carmelo Anthony is my favorite player that has ever played for one of my teams in the NBA. I grew up a Nuggets fan, actually rooting for him. And then eventually when he, of course, went to the New York Knicks, me being a New York guy, I jumped on the bandwagon and followed him over there. Since I have not left the New York Knicks, I've been on their train ever since. And so Jalen Brunson, of course, has a special place in my heart as well. But to me, that's certainly crazy. You look at what Tyler Hansbrough did. I mean, you're talking about one of the more decorated players in really the history of college basketball. So to me, I think it's just flat out disrespect. I don't really know what they're looking at. Maybe the fact that he only won one national championship, but even still, I mean, over a guy like Jameer Nelson, and I get it, Jameer Nelson was at a smaller school. Maybe that's where you're sort of giving him a break. But I mean, you go back to, his best year in Chapel Hill, which was 2007, 2008. I mean, leads the country in scoring and rebounding per game, 22.6 points, 10.2 rebounds per game. Was really good on the national championship squad, a team that was loaded, by the way. That's the other thing. 3-time first-team All-American. And I believe, I don't remember, I don't know if he's the only one to do it. I believe he might be the only one that has been a 4-time All-American in his time at the college level. So, look, it's crazy to me. There are so many great players that, of course, played during the last 25 years. But when you're talking about it, I mean, you're talking about the greatest player maybe in the history of Carolina basketball, one of the more storied programs in the country, and this guy can't even crack the top 5. I think that's a little wild. Again, there are some names on there that deserve a ton of respect for what they did. But, I mean, Tyler Hansbrough is really as special as it gets in terms of everything that he brought to the table. I mean, to come in as a freshman and average 18.9 points a game, 7.8 rebounds per game, and really just go up from there. I mean, immediately, plays in 31 games as a freshman, starts 30 of them. To come in and immediately start like that, and to be as impactful as he was, to be an All-American, I think really says a lot. You go back to that game against Duke his freshman year where he really takes over, in that game in Durham. And that was really the moment where everything started to shift towards him and where he took over the ACC. And from that point on, it was really just complete dominance. So he deserves to be inside the top 5. There's absolutely no question in my mind about that. We'll have to wait and see, moving forward, in future generations where they put him. But to me, I think, he should be as respected as just about anybody in the entire country for what he did. I mean, to win Player of the Year as well, that's something that some of these other guys can't even put on their ledger. I mean, I know Jalen Brunson, I believe, won Player of the Year the year that they won the national championship. He did. Yeah, makes sense why he is on that list. But I don't think that, him, even though he's got 2 national championships, I don't think that he should be ahead of a guy like Tyler Hansbrough. I was just laying out, the resume that Tyler Hansbrough has. I think it's unbelievable that a guy that is a 4-time All-American, 3-time first-team All-American, National Player of the Year in 2007, 2008, and a national champion is not in the top 5, especially considering he is one of the greatest players in the history of arguably the greatest program in college basketball.
Yeah, I want to apologize. Having some connection issues over here on my end. It's what happens when you have thunderstorms that just don't seem to go away. If he's not first, I can live with that. I can stomach that. What Carmelo did at Syracuse, remarkable stuff. Especially when you factor in that was the only national championship that Jim Boeheim won during his 77 plus years at Syracuse as a player and as a coach. So if you want to put Melo maybe ahead of him because of just how dominant he was too, he averaged a double-double. Okay, maybe I can live with that. I think, and I don't want to take away from a 2-time national champion like Jalen Brunson, but the Jalen Brunson that we now see in the NBA, who's a top 10 player for the Knicks, I don't think that's who he was at the college level, where he averaged less than 15 points per game, less than 3 rebounds, and less than 4 assists. He was phenomenal during that 2018 run where it was very clear that that was the best team in the country. But I have a real difficult time with him being ranked above a 4-time All-American, a 4-time All-ACC player, a National Player of the Year, the guy that played in 2 Final Fours, won a national championship, the all-time leading scorer at the best program in the sport, the all-time leading scorer in the most decorated conference in the sport. I've got a real big issue with that. I also got a problem with Steph being ranked ahead of him. Again, I think how much of what we've seen from Steph in the NBA is playing a role in how we remember Steph in college. He was phenomenal in 2008. That was one of the best runs we've ever seen individually by a player because he just scored and scored and scored and did so in a very efficient manner. I think we're all forgetting that he came back to college the next year and Davidson missed the tournament. They didn't go dancing. Now, granted, they were in a 1-bid league, but mind you, if he's the 3rd best player in the last 25 years, you would think that guy is not missing out on March Madness. Anthony Davis, okay, kind of like Carmelo, where he was just so dominant for a team that would go on to win a national championship. Kemba Walker, it was a month.
Yeah.
It was a month. Now, it's the greatest individual run we've ever seen, maybe in the history of sports, man, especially at the college level. We just haven't seen something quite like what Kemba did when he led UConn to the national championship. But to put him over what Hansbrough did from the moment he walked on campus and was for 4 years the best player at Carolina and was tried to take away every single night and still put up the numbers he put up. I love Kemba Walker, man. I've got a real problem with Kemba being ranked ahead of him. And then Jameer Nelson, part of it with Jameer, obviously, I did not watch Jameer Nelson play. It was just I remember Jameer Nelson as a point guard for the Magic when they made the finals. I didn't see what he did at St. Joe's. To put a guy that played in the Atlantic 10 ahead of a 4-time All-American in the ACC, to me, is disrespectful. Like, what are we doing? So there are certain guys that I understand and I hear the argument for, and some of them are even one-and-done guys. But I think for guys like Steph and Jalen Brunson, we're looking at more of what they've done in the NBA and misremembering what they were in college. And Kemba, there's just, a lot of nostalgia around what he did with his one tournament run. But something like there's got to be something said for a guy staying 4 years at a premier program, being the best player all 4 years he was in college, and putting up the numbers he put up night in, night out. And for Hansbrough to be ranked 8th when he's arguably maybe the best player in the history of the ACC, like, guys, we got to do better. Like, we got to do a much better job listening when we're doing these rankings, because these rankings are telling the story of the sport. And to say that he was the 8th best player the last 25 years, I don't think is accurately detailing just how dominant Tyler Hansbrough was during his time as a Tar Heel.
It's terrible. I mean, honestly, when you look at it as compared to the guys that are around him, really what it is that you look at all those other guys that are around him, and all of them had legitimate NBA careers. Tyler Hansbrough did not, because Tyler Hansbrough was an all-time college player that his game just didn't really translate to the NBA level. Now, I'm the guy that thinks if he lands somewhere that is not Indiana and actually gets a little bit more of a chance early in his career, then his career probably ends up looking a little different. But it is what it is. I think that they are looking at the pro careers of some of these guys and using that as a factor as to what they were at the college level. Because, yeah, Jameer Nelson, dude, there's nothing historic about what Jameer Nelson did. I mean, because he played at St. Joe's? I mean, yeah, again, I'm not trying to take away from what any of these guys did and say that they weren't special. But, I mean, to be honest with you, I think you can make the argument that he should be number 1 on this list. Now, you're basing it on the fact that there are other guys. I mean, if you're comparing his freshman season to Carmelo's freshman season, then you would probably lean Melo wins the title, has even more rebounds than he did that season, and was a second-team All-American just like him. But, I mean, when you compare some of these other guys, I mean, look, man, like Jameer Nelson was a guy that was a 4-year producer at St. Joe's. That ain't the same thing as being a 4-year producer at Carolina, especially during that era. That's a great point, that the ACC at that time was the greatest conference in the sport, and it wasn't even close. And he dominated that conference for 4 years. He came in, immediately took over. I was talking about the game against Duke in Durham, in Cameron Indoor, where he just goes off and basically steals the ACC throne away from JJ Redick and says, this is my conference now, and controlled it for the next 4 years. And then, I mean, he's got the national championship. Like, if he didn't have the national title, I could sort of get where people are coming from. But, I mean, some of these other guys, like, what are we doing here? You know, Kemba Walker, I mean, he gets the national championship, and he had a hell of a year. But you're right. It really was just that stretch. I mean, he was pretty good that entire season. But we're not acting like that is the greatest season of all time, to where, you know, that just trumps everything else that Tyler Hansbrough could have possibly done. You know, I think that the one and done guys are the toughest ones because you just don't know what they could have eventually turned into. Maybe they produce at a 4-year level like this. And then, you know, Steph Curry, I mean, that's the same thing. As you mentioned, he comes back and they don't even make the NCAA tournament that next year. That has to mean something against his legacy, that he made the one run. And, yeah, it was great at Davidson, and he deserves to probably be inside the top 10. But to be ahead of Tyler Hansbrough, a guy that is the all-time leading scorer in the greatest conference in the history of the sport, I think is a lot. I mean, we've talked about it. We've had the debates plenty of times with people. He is the greatest player in the history of Carolina basketball, and we believe that he's the greatest player in the history of the ACC. You know, that some people would disagree with that. We hear a lot of people, especially NC State fans, that are not happy whenever we bring that up, but we truly believe that he's the greatest player that's ever played in this conference. And if that's the case, then I find it hard for him not to be at least top 3, if not number 1 on this list.
One last thing from this, and then we'll wrap up shop. Him being 8th, definitely a surprise. Is there only being one Tar Heel on the list from the last 25 years a surprise? I'll go through the rest of the top 25. So number 11 is Dougie Buckets, Doug McDermott at Creighton. Number 12, Dwayne Wade, who took Marquette to the Final Four. Number 13, Frank Kaminsky, who took Wisconsin to back-to-back Final Fours. Number 14, Shabazz Napier, who, I mean, kind of like Kemba, had a run that led UConn to a national championship. Number 15, Adam Morrison, the Gonzaga standout. Number 16, Jimmer Fredette, BYU. Number 17, Russ Smith was ranked the 17th best player of the last 25 years. Number 18, Emeka Okafor at UConn. Number 19, Jay Williams at Duke. Number 20, Joakim Noah from Florida, back-to-back national champion winner. Number 21, Blake Griffin. Number 22, that's where you get J.J. Redick from Duke. Number 23, Michael Beasley, right there with Kevin Durant, is one of the best one-and-done freshmen to never win a national championship. Number 24, former standout under Roy Williams at Kansas, Nick Collison. And then they had tied for 25th, Zion Williamson and Cooper Flagg of Duke.
Wow.
Now you hold me accountable here. You're telling me that, like, and look, there's problems with the rest of this list up and down, but you're telling me that Russ Smith was a better basketball player than Ty Lawson was for Louisville at Carolina?
Yeah, that was the first name that came to mind for me, was Ty Lawson, and then I also immediately decided to look at Sean May's stats as well. That would be the two players that I would look towards and say they should have a pretty decent case to be on here. I mean, Sean May in his career averaged a double-double, 15.8 points per game, 10 rebounds even, was a second-team All-American in 2004, 2005, wins the national championship, was dominant in their run to win that national title. I think he certainly has a case. And then, Ty Lawson, I think, is right there with him. A second-team All-American his final season at Carolina. You look at how he played really from early in his career, too. He became a starter as a freshman, only averaged 10.2 points per game, but still had 5.6 assists that year. Ends up finishing his career with a season where he averages 16.6 a game, 6.6 rebounds, or 6.6 assists per game. And also did a really good job of taking away the basketball with 2.1 steals per game, which actually led all of college basketball during that time. So, he's got both guys, I think, have a hell of a case to be on this list. And I wouldn't have minded if they went with either one of them. But I'm going to tell you, they seem really down on the ACC because J.J. Redick being as low as he is crazy. Cooper Flagg being as low as he is. And I think what happened in Cooper Flagg's season ultimately was considered a failure. We've talked about that because that was a team that was as stacked as just about any in the country. You're telling me that season that kid just had is 25th, tied for the 25th best season that we've ever seen, or behind some of these other guys like Russ Smith? Come on, man. That's insane to me. So, two guys that have national championships for Carolina, I think they should both get some sort of representation.
Yeah, I tend to lean towards Ty Lawson just a little bit over Sean May. I think you definitely can make the argument for both, but when you look at Lawson and the impact that he had on that team, the whole national championship was dependent upon his health. Like when he injured his toe when they beat Duke on senior night, and you didn't quite know what it was going to mean for him moving forward. It's why Carolina maybe wasn't as clear-cut a pick to win the national championship. You look at what happened when they were down, I think it was 9 points in the second half against LSU in the second round. Arguably the most nervous I think I've ever been during an NCAA tournament game because the outlook was bleak. And then he scores 21 points and Carolina goes on to victory. You mentioned that you talk about the national title game. He set the record for most steals in a title game with 8, and he tied the record in the first half. He had 7 steals in the first half of a national championship game. Was the ACC Player of the Year that year. Did so very efficiently. Became a deadly outside shooter for Carolina, and they needed him because Wayne Ellington didn't shoot the ball well until the back half of the ACC season that year. I think what Lawson did kind of gets overlooked, probably because he played with a Tyler Hansbrough, but he was just as much a big reason why Carolina would go on to win that national championship as Hansbrough was. Neither one of them were the most outstanding player of the Final Four. That, of course, went to Wayne Ellington. So I think you bring up a great point about the ACC not getting a whole lot of respect with J.J. Redick being as low as he is. Flagg and Zion being tied for 25th is kind of criminal, where Zion was the most efficient player we've ever seen in the KenPom era. And then we all saw Cooper Flagg's impact for Duke. Yes, those teams ultimately underachieved, but individually they were better than their one seasons were better than what I think Russ Smith did at Louisville. And I enjoyed Russ Smith. I enjoyed those Louisville teams that went to back-to-back Final Fours, won a national title that was later vacated. But what some other guys did was a lot more impressive. And I think it's a pretty poor reflection of what these people think of the ACC when you see some of the greatest players this conference has ever produced, being ranked so low, or B, not being ranked altogether. But that's the beauty of these lists, is they generate conversation. They generate debate. And we've got another one that we'll have a chance to go through later this offseason as well, when they rank the top 25 teams of the last 25 years. So we'll do that on a later edition of the podcast sometime later this offseason. I thought that would be a great way to back end the transfer portal conversation, given the fact that Ivan Matlakovich did not, warrant us spending 30 to 35 minutes talking about him individually. With that in mind, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Four Corners podcast. In the meantime, we'll direct you guys to the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. We're in full throttle preseason mode for the upcoming football season. Position previews coming out left and right. The offensive side of the ball has been taken care of. We'll turn our attention to the defensive side of the football starting this weekend. So be on the lookout for that. Big day recruiting for Carolina football as well. 2 commits in the 2026 class. Anthony, had you covered on that front as well. In addition to that, I had you covered late last night with the Ivan Matlakovich stuff. Any other news and notes around the Carolina basketball program, though, it'll be there on the website for you guys to read. Simply put, we encourage you to go to that website every single day. That's HeelToughBlog.com for the latest and the best coverage of Carolina basketball and Tar Heel football. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, simply search the Four Corners podcast and we'll pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the basketball offseason. Last night we were live on here doing the What If series. We made our way through the 1960s. Next up, we'll be in the 1970s. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you don't miss the offseason series that we're doing and any other additions that'll come your way, including we will review what the Field of 68 guys had to say, because their offseason grades weren't the kindest to Hubert Davis in Carolina. That edition of the podcast will come to you sometime later next week. With that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the podcast here on a Friday night. Do want to apologize once again for my connection issues. Thanks to Anthony for stepping up and taking over until I was able to get back online with you guys. But with that, that's going to wrap up this edition of the show. Well, I want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. I want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.